Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Veramed Stories podcast. I'm your host, Himesh Chauhan, and in this week's episode, we will be talking about neurodiversity. Joining me this week are three members of our Neurodiversity Group. So allow me to introduce, in no particular order, Gwen Perry, a statistician. Gwen, welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Ingrid Franklin, another statistician.
Hello.
And Alex, a fellow programmer. Alex, hello and welcome to the podcast.
Hiya. Thank you.
Right, let's dive into it. So let's start off. What is neurodiversity?
Okay, so I'm going to do my best to describe it in a way that does it justice, but if Gwen or Alex want to add anything, then obviously please do. So neurodiversity is a term used to describe the fact that people experience and interact with the world in different ways, and really that there's no one right way of thinking. So it's a term that applies to all of those people that have neurological differences, including ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, people on the autism spectrum with autism spectrum disorder. Those are some of the more commonly, I guess, known conditions, but there's a whole host of other things as well that you may not have heard of that would come under this umbrella term. And is now more commonly being used to nurture the idea that these differences are valuable, really valuable to us, and that they're actually a really important part of human diversity. Primarily, one of the points that we really want to get across is that these differences are something that we should celebrate, and they shouldn't be viewed as deficits in any way. And not only do we think that this way of thinking will help those with neurological differences feel more included, but it should also help everyone to be able to realise their full potential, which is obviously very important in the world of work. And yeah, I guess lastly, just to add that understanding these differences and the differences of everybody in our teams that we might be working in should help us collaborate in a more efficient and inclusive way.
Okay, yeah, so I'm sure these are all terms that everybody has heard of and come across. It's nice term to collect them all together. So as I mentioned, the three of you are all members of our neurodiversity group that we have here in Veramed. How did the group get started?
So, basically, it started off as some internal conversations following some discussions with employees and their line managers. There was a realization within Veramed that we really needed to understand more about this area and what we could do to support employees who expressed themselves that they were neurodivergent. So basically, the Culture Club was set up in order to really embrace Veramed's values and portray Veramed's values. And it became one of the Culture Club's 10 commitments for basically spreading awareness of neurodiversity and embracing it. And so the Culture Club asked for volunteers who felt passionate about this issue, and then to take this on as an ongoing project to raise awareness.
Okay, yeah, I see. And I suppose as the company's getting bigger and bigger, it's definitely more important that we have these kind of groups set up to help our sort of neurodivergent colleagues as well.
Yeah.
How was neurodiversity handled before the group started within Veramed?
Well, there wasn't really anything official in place. To be honest, I guess there just wasn't really the same level of awareness of neurodiversity as there is starting to become now. I hadn't really heard of the term of neurodiversity, I guess, until fairly recently, certainly within the last year. I don't know how typical that was. I think probably it is kind of coming more and more known and people are hearing a lot more about it. So I suspect I wasn't alone in having not heard of neurodiversity before. I guess the one thing I would say is that Veramed is generally a very supportive company, and if people have additional needs, I certainly wouldn't have hesitated to kind of take those needs to either my line manager, my team lead, or to HR. And I think that's a fairly kind of common feeling within Veramed, that it is a very supportive company. Yeah, there was nothing official in place. I guess when I was a study lead, my main aim was to try and just understand all of my team and learn different ways, in which people communicate, because I was very aware that people don't all work in the same way. So removing the term neurodiversity from what I was doing, I did have a level of awareness of, just the fact that everybody's different and that we needed to take that into account, and kind of really tried to make sure people felt comfortable talking to me if they had concerns or issues, or if they needed any kind of additional assistance in any way. So I think while there was nothing official in place, probably line managers and team leads did try and work in that sort of manner. That's definitely a culture that kind of comes from the top and I think is passed down to people that work at Veramed.
So it sounds like it was something that's always kind of already been in place. But like we said, as the company's getting bigger, it's something nice to have something official. So with that being said, Alex, you joined the company a couple of months ago. How did you feel joining a company that had a group like this already in place?
In a word, very comforting. Like during the whole interview process too, like Veramed pushing their focus on mental health, personalizing the role, about, appreciating differences that everyone has, made me so enthusiastic to join is the reason I chose Veramed. And then when I actually started to work here, maybe I joined at the right time, but in the first all-staff meeting that I went to, there was both a section on the Neurodiversity Group, which is how I found out and joined it, going through what their aims were and just letting everyone know the group was being formed and what they were doing. And then also, slight tangent, but the seasonal coders corner as well, which might seem like a weird thing to mention, but just it gave me a really strong sense of the culture, and that Veramed really did try and push the culture that they said they said they were going to, right? They were actually caring about things that were important, caring about neurodiversity. They had programmers who obviously enjoyed programming and would do it on their spare time. And, it's the kind of people I really wanted to work for, and seeing that actually in practice, because I've worked previously, there's sometimes been some notion of neurodiversity, I suppose, but it's always been like a footnote, like a general diversity corporate training or something that never had any kind of particular focus and was never properly looked at. It was more just everyone is different generally, but never any focus group for it or any adjustments or things like that. So yeah, it's fantastic to be honest, to see it, and I really hope that it becomes a wider spread thing.
No, absolutely. And I think doing things like this, like having a podcast and kind of talking about neurodiversity and kind of spreading awareness is very important. As Ingrid mentioned, it's not a term that I'd personally heard of, even though I've heard of like ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and like autism and all this other things. I've heard of all the things that come under the umbrella, but never the actual term neurodiversity. So I think this is a good medium to help spread awareness and everything. So what are the goals of the group?
So I think the first thing we want to do is to raise awareness of neurodiversity within the company, and really to help people understand what it is, give people the tools they need to better support neurodiverse colleagues if they're not neurodiverse themselves. So we're going to be running certain trainings, first of all for everybody in the company, but also then a specific training for study leads and for line managers to just kind of make sure that they're well equipped to be able to support neurodiverse colleagues. And kind of just be there if people need any advice, I guess, or any additional support. So even if they just want to chat about an experience they've had, they kind of know that we are the people within this working group that they can come to. They know our names, they can just ping us, or if they want to have a side chat with any one of us, then they can do that. I think they're our main aims, but Gwen, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, the supporting colleagues bit is a really big focus as well, because with a lot of neurodivergent conditions like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, we do often face quite a lot of challenges. Like I myself, I struggle with communication, I struggle with information processing, which I've had for a long time. And, reading and writing obviously is very common for people with dyslexia. And so really what this group is all about as well is how can we improve the day-to-day lives of our colleagues through education, basically. Like how can we make our work as enjoyable, effective as possible, while also remaining as our authentic selves as well. And also just like utilizing our strengths as well. There are also a lot of strengths that come with neurodivergence as well, such as hyper-focusing, great attention to detail, that can sometimes be overlooked. So this is what it's all about. It's just raising awareness and educating people.
No, absolutely. And like you said, like the sort of strengths from it, like the being over analytical and things like that, they're brilliant traits to have in this industry. You need to like really analyze the data and things that you're looking at. And these are things that are just, like you said, is slightly overlooked, but are great assets to any sort of team. Gwen, if you wouldn't mind, would you like to share sort of like your personal experiences with neurodiversity?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was diagnosed with autism quite late in my life compared to a lot of other people. I was diagnosed like a month before turning 17. So by then I'd already done my GCSEs and left school by then with very limited support. And then when I was doing my A-levels then and I had that diagnosis, it meant that I could get access to support services and charities that I needed and get extra time in college. And that went through to university as well. I got the support I needed with disability services. I did a placement year as a data analyst for a company, and I made them aware as well of my autism. But yeah, it really came to my notice quite quickly just how little people understood about autism. There were quite a lot of misconceptions. For example, like one of the first people I told about my autism, they said to me, "Oh, are you like Rain Man then?" And I was like, "Well, no." Not really. No. Autism is such a spectrum.
Well, exactly. And the person who Rayman was based on was a 1 in a million sort of thing. Like he had a double photographic memory and...
Oh, I would love that.
Yeah, I think everybody would, to be honest.
That would be so useful.
Incredible skill to have. But yeah, like things like media like do unfortunately portray these things with a bit of ignorance, really, with not actually, and they use it as a very broad term, not realizing it is a spectrum. Not everyone with autism is the same. It's a shame that you have to kind of go through that, but it's good that hopefully with something like this, we can help raise more awareness so other people don't have to. You mentioned that you were diagnosed at sort of 17. How did you feel once you got the diagnosis?
Oh, honestly, it was one of the best things that happened to me, genuinely. Like it was so, because I always knew that I was just a bit like different from other people and from other kids. I didn't really fit in. And to me, I mean, obviously like it's different for everyone, but for me, I just needed that validation of this is why you're different. And also there are people like you who are different in similar kinds of ways to you. So I felt like I kind of belonged in this group with my differences, if that makes sense. Yeah, and it also helped me to understand a lot more about myself and how I can apply myself with my work and help with my friendships and my relationships and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it definitely improved my life for sure.
No, absolutely. And it's always nice when you feel like you're not alone, because most of the time when you talk about these sort of things, you find out you're not alone, and it's very warming and comforting feeling. So Alex, would you like to share some of your personal experiences as well?
Yeah, sure, can do. So kind of contrasting to Gwen, I was diagnosed with, it was called Asperger's back then, but now that tends to fall under the general umbrella of just autism. But I was diagnosed with that and dyspraxia when I was young. I think I was like 4 or something, so it was early childhood. And also I have a form of neurogenic stuttering. Also, just sorry, side note, because this bothers me. Whoever chose to make the word for that start with a plosive, like that's genuinely one of the hardest words for me to say, is some kind of sick joke.
Wow, I didn't know that.
There's also Lisp has the S sound. Dyslexia is actually a really hard word to spell. Yeah, there's a few of those, which is, I don't know why that's a thing, but apparently it is.
Yeah, someone's obviously having fun.
Yes.
But yeah, neurogenic, the neurogenic part of that just means it's some kind of brain damage disorder, physical cause thing, as opposed to developmental, I think is the other main one. For me, it was just when I was born, my lungs weren't great, so didn't have the oxygen to my brain for a while, which is, I know it's maybe a dark thing to talk about, but I found it genuinely interesting when I found out, because I didn't know for 10, 15 years like what the cause was. And then I had a ed psych, I think it was when I was getting a report for extra time in school. I had them just talk to me about my conditions generally, and they're like, oh yeah, that's because of this. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense, because I always knew of the two different bits, but I never connected them. Anyway, sorry, tangent.
That's all right.
So yeah, also, as well as me, just to go into my family slightly, I also have a older brother with severe autism, and a older sister who was diagnosed with Asperger's too. So it's always was always a lively household, but difficult in that we're all on the spectrum, but also presented in very different ways, especially me and my brother. So I have a lot of respect for Mum for having to deal with that when we were growing up. It couldn't have been easy.
You said you were sort of diagnosed very early, as opposed to Gwen, who was 17. So you were 4. Did you understand what it meant at that age, or was it just more you kind of got support and didn't know why?
Yes and no. Like, it was definitely, it did help me somewhat, knowing that, you know, as Gwen said, that there was some validation, some reason that I was different. So I knew, you know, essentially all I had in my mind was there's a reason why I'm different. I didn't understand what the spectrum was as a whole. I didn't really know what implications it had, in particular, especially when I was younger. Me and my brother would fight like cat and dog. It was challenging at times, because we were and are so similar in so many different ways. Like, a lot of the things that we're strong at are very similar, but then also we couldn't be more different in others. And when I'm younger and all I know is we both have roughly the same diagnosis is all that I knew, I was like, well, why are we so different? Why doesn't he think this way? Why does he do this that way? And it did cause a lot of problems. Also because of that. Also, sorry, do let me know if I ran too much.
No, carry on.
I did also used to compare myself with my brother a lot, because him being older, as well as he's genuinely like a mathematical genius. He is insane. Like, he's very much on the savant side of autism. His maths is incredible. We're talking like GCSEs at age 10, kind of like.
Oh wow.
He's
Wow.
stupid smart at it. And then there was me, who, I mean, I still did very well. I still was like top of my classes in sixth form and things, but, you know, I was just the best of the, you know, normal progression. And then there was him, who was insanely good. There was always that living in shadow type aspect, which again came from me not really understanding as much that there was a difference, and it was okay to present differently and have different strengths. Like, there's something I'm a lot better at than him, and, you know, it varies.
Yes, of course.
So
That's crazy, because, like, yeah, if your older brother wasn't so incredibly genius in maths, and you were just from, like, you know, you had normal neurotypical siblings, then you'd be seen as the person who's really, really good at maths. But because you had that comparison with your brother, you know, that's actually like, wow, that's like crazy.
Yeah, it was a weird dynamic. I'm definitely appreciative of it being a thing now. You know, it was a reason why I pushed myself a lot harder, and I had more expectation of myself. So it has come around full circle and been a lot more healthy. Also, something that really helped me, and I've got to thank my mum for, is when we were growing up, she took us to Autism Oxford conferences. So it's like a conference that you go to where there are people who come out and talk about essentially doing this, right? Talking about their kind of experiences with autism, the kind of help that you can get, how different people view it, and so on. Just to, you know, let you know you're not the only person, and to try and give you help if needed, which at the time I saw as like me understanding myself better, which did obviously that it did help that, but definitely gave me more of an appreciation for the whole idea of the spectrum, and helped me understand my brother a lot more. Not that we still didn't fight, but
yeah, of course, we're siblings.
No, of course. And just to say, we do get along much better now, especially after I moved out, and there was that distance. Like there's a lot more of a respect of the other person's challenges and how they had impacts on the other person as well, and what it meant to us growing up.
I feel anytime you do have older siblings, there is always that kind of sort of rivalry, and it's hard not to kind of compare yourself to an older or younger sibling and things like this, regardless if you're neurodiverse or non-neurodiverse. It's one of those things where like you don't necessarily appreciate how you've helped each other until you've kind of stepped away from it and you look back and you're like, actually, I wouldn't have got to where I am today without that. It's nice to know that you do now get along with your brother and things like this. So no, that's excellent. Ingrid, do you have any sort of personal experience that you would like to share?
I think not in the same way as Alex and Gwen. So I would say I'm neurotypical. So I don't have personal experiences of living with one of the neurological differences in the same way that they do. I've worked with people with autism and dyslexia. So they're primarily my experiences with it. Didn't necessarily know kind of immediately from the off that I was working with people with neurological differences, but certainly was aware that there were differences in different members of the team. And yeah, I think one of the things that I was always careful with, certainly with one of my team members, was that I knew that they were kind of very easily overwhelmed with certain things, and so just to make sure that I kind of, if at all possible, gave warning for things rather than just springing things on that person. In the same way that some people might be able to handle that, other people it's too much, and you need to just make sure that you're kind of giving plenty of warning. Was kind of aware that some people like things written down so they can have time themselves to go over things before you have a meeting, whereas other people just like to talk it through. So yeah, I guess kind of in a general sense, just working with people with various differences, and also just working with this group, which has been amazing because I've learned so much about neurodiversity, and I don't have any doubt that the training that's being done by Gwen and Amber is going to be amazing for the company, and everyone's going to learn a lot from it. So yeah, I think it's been really good being part of the working group. I've learned a lot, and it's been really enjoyable as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, when you're working with people that you don't necessarily know are neurodivergent, like you said, it's quite hard to sort of juggle everybody's skills and just trying to like make sure everybody flourishes. And it's something that you probably do instinctively as well, without typically knowing everyone's sort of diagnoses and all this kind of things. But you kind of tend to spot that, like, oh, actually this person here is very analytical, like I'll give them this piece of work, or this, like you said, like this person likes to know things before a meeting, so we'll give them this sort of thing. So it's something that probably people have done just naturally anyway, but when you have this sort of awareness, it makes things just a lot easier and makes it easier to understand your colleagues. So no, it's really good. What are the other sort of, like, we kind of touched on it before, but the other sort of like common misconceptions about neurodivergence?
So it's a much more of a catch-all term here, but definitely the one that I see a lot, especially growing up, was this is specifically for autism, but the idea that people are either on one end of the spectrum or the other, like either it tends to be with either the social or the intellectual symptoms, if that's the right word, and the way they present for those, like either being very unsocial or very smart, or they're not being as much of a gray area, not the idea of a spectrum, because I feel like that's probably what the media portrayed more because it was more interesting, I suppose. And I think that's getting better now, and the idea that everyone is very different, you don't have to be so outward and so obviously neurodivergent. It doesn't always present, at least outwardly.
Yeah, I'd like to really add to Alex's point, actually, because when I first came out as autistic, a lot of people didn't actually believe me at first. Often as well, people forget too. So I've had to more than once remind people that I'm autistic, because they think that my traits aren't as severe as maybe some other people who are autistic, or the traits aren't kind of the ones that they'd associate with autism. So for instance, I read really, really, really slowly, really slowly. And actually, most people I know who are autistic don't struggle with that in quite the same way. So like it's not so, that's actually quite an unusual trait. And so it's just really knowing that actually, like with all of these neurodivergent conditions, like there can be a lot of overlap, and just being open-minded really, I think, is a really good key take-home message.
Yeah, it sounds like you shouldn't sort of like pigeonhole someone with one thing, because at the end of the day, you should treat everyone as an individual. Everybody has their strengths, everybody has their weaknesses, and it's when you work in a company, working in a team, it's always best to highlight people's strengths. So you might read slowly, but I bet you're really analytical. So
yeah, yeah.
It's always good to like embrace these differences, and it makes life more interesting. To me, I don't think there's such thing as normal, quote unquote normal. If everybody was, it'd be boring. Like I love different personalities. I love like hearing different people's point of views and different perspectives. And especially in this industry, it's so important for us to be able to do our jobs and be able to like do it well. So you both mentioned that you were diagnosed in school or before you kind of started sixth form. What sort of support did you get from education level, and how was it from going from education to university sort of to work life, where that support wasn't necessarily there or at the same level as it was during school?
I guess for me, certainly in school, honestly, the support was kind of limited for me, at least. Potentially it was where I grew up, because keeping in mind this was 15, 20 years ago, when I was first going through it. The knowledge of neurodiversity wasn't really there, so it was more just a case of keeping an eye on me and making sure things were going okay, but the actual knowledge of what things I might need help with and what the details wasn't really there. I mean, my teachers were still great, mind. They did their best with what they had, but there was, I mean, I make it sound bad, it was really nice having like people looking out for me and just making sure I was doing okay. There was nothing more targeted than that, really, at least for the autism. Dyspraxia wise, that was fine, because that's a lot more measurable, right? Because the main way it presents itself to me is that I write very slowly. So as soon as the school realized that, there was a quick test, and then they chose that I would have extra time for all of my tests, and that was pretty much the extent of the support I got there, as well as, right, I suppose, just teachers knowing that to maybe not go through content too quickly, and to, you know, make sure that everyone is caught up before moving on, and so on. One other thing that bugs me, I don't know if stuttering exactly counts as neurodiversity. That's still a bit of a grey area. Some say yes, some say no. But just because it's a bugbear of mine, in school, I had very much the opposite of the support for that. The one that sticks in mind was my French orals. I was docked marks, like I went down a grade because I wasn't speaking fluently. I explained multiple times why, and was like, yeah, well, that's not going to happen. I just like physically can't. And so that was definitely not something that they were aware of.
Right. That's quite interesting, because I'm sure anyone from any language, any country has a stutter. Like, it's not exclusive to English-speaking people.
I feel like maybe it's because a lot of people, when they think of it, think of the classic repeating the first like sound of a word when you like go to say it, like type thing.
Yeah.
That's what most people think of, whereas mine is more of a inability to make a sound. So I like pause.
I see.
In conversation, kind of like I just did there, and can't like physically make the sound for a while. So I guess they probably just didn't understand that was it, because they couldn't hear it. It was all in my head, technically, right?
Right.
So yeah, I'm not sure. But for uni, I don't really know if it was that different. They offered to give me a note taker, so I didn't have to do the writing for the dyspraxia. I didn't take them up on it purely because I'm very visual with my learning. I like to lay things out on the page in a certain way, use colors for different things and so on. So I was like, well, I'm not really going to learn if I don't physically write it, and also it would make the notes harder to use. So it was nice they offered, but I didn't take them up on it. But transition wise, maybe this isn't the expected answer, but honestly, it was absolutely fine. Going from uni to work.
Okay.
Like uni was not fun. It was definitely the most difficult part of my life. I think there's a coined term, gifted kid syndrome, where because I went through school, to be blunt, not having to put much work into my grades and just, coasting by getting top marks without having to properly work, and then going to uni, and I've not learned the skill set to actually work and to look things up and to deal with the pressure if things get too much. So getting into that so late with such an extreme case of it was going from that to work was honestly a breath of fresh air. Nowhere near as much social pressure as well. It's especially programming. I could especially when I first started programming, I was much less social. I was a lot more just head down, getting work done, and just enjoying what I was doing. And then slowly, as I realized I was with the same kind of people and that I could just be myself more, that opened up. So it was the best thing for me, was starting to work. So maybe not what you were expecting, but
that's good. No, I'm pleased that you had a smooth transition from at least uni to work. And it's nice that, like we said before, like when you're working with sort of like-minded people, it's easier. You don't have to explain, like people just get it, and you just feel it's more comforting, isn't it? How about yourself, Gwen? How did you find sort of the transition from sort of education to uni, placement year, and then now work?
I was just thinking, like, would it be okay if I could talk a little bit about my childhood as well, like that I've missed out on previously?
Of course.
Because I literally just remembered, and I know my mum, if she was listening to this, she'd be kicking me if I didn't bring this up. So even though I was diagnosed with autism actually quite late in my childhood, I actually was from a very young age, actually about 4 or 5, like Alex, I actually was struggling verbally to communicate and express proper sentences. It wasn't actually until about 8 that I could actually speak properly with proper sentences. My speaking was very disjointed. It was really difficult for me to ask for things. I would have to say like water, instead of can I have a glass of water? And I would just point. And that was how I communicated. And interestingly, when I was in primary school, I did actually receive a lot of speech and language therapy in primary school to teach me how to express and basically speak and to just describe things. I'd be given pictures and asked about the colors and the shapes and stuff. Growing up, it was really difficult because of like difficulty with speaking. I know you can't imagine it because I just love to talk now. And maybe that's why it's from all those years of suppression, I think. But it was difficult because I remember, like, obviously I would understand conversations. It wasn't really I could understand what my parents and my brother and sister were talking about, and I would want to join in the conversation, but I was always too late because by the time I formed the sentence in my head, the conversation had already moved on. And that, as a child with autism, that gave me a lot of stress, gave me a lot of anxiety, and made me really sad because I couldn't communicate. And you know what? I think research into autism has gone such a long way that, I've spoken about this with my mum as well. She works in a primary school and she works very closely with kids with like neurodivergent conditions and stuff. That's her job as well. I spoke with her and literally we agreed that, like, if I was that age now, like in this day and age, I would have been diagnosed like then. As a young child, I think, much sooner. It would have been spotted. It would have been looked into, and I just went under the radar, really. So I just thought I wanted to bring that up because
that is interesting. Like you said, you talk a lot now, just like me. So it's not something I would have guessed that you had gone through. So no, that is very interesting.
Yeah. I kind of forced myself really to get better, I guess, and the therapy helped. And so transition from uni to work. Well, I had a lot of support in primary school. Didn't have much support in high school because my files were misplaced from primary school to secondary school. They lost my files. They didn't even know I had a problem. That was interesting. And then in sixth form college, then I got support again because I was back on the radar and I had extra time and I had a spare room for my A-level exams, for my university exams as well. My lecturers, I was very open about it because they were very supportive and open too. And because all of the teachers and lecturers were supportive, it meant that I could get what I needed. So I did relatively well. And then entering the workplace, I was like, okay, right, extra time's not really something that happens here. And we don't really do our work in a spare room that much, really. We have a quiet room, but it's not quite the same. It's just like, how do I then adjust with the accommodations that I've been used to at uni with work? And so yeah, it's been interesting. Been just trying to draw up with my line manager the things that work and don't work for me, and having an open discussion really.
Yeah.
Has been like the main thing.
So do you find splitting your time between working from home and working in the office helps?
Absolutely, 100%, 1,000,000%. And not just because I live far away and the commute and everything, which obviously would be a pain for anyone, but actually just having a breather, a day where I'm not, as much as I love socializing, as much as I love you, Himesh, as much as I love socializing, it really wears me out a lot because of my autism. So
Right.
just having a day at home where I can just take a breather, maybe chat on Google Chat, don't need to do that eye contact, don't need to do that face-to-face stuff.
What's quite interesting about that is I'm obviously very extroverted. I love chatting, I love small talk and all that stuff. But after a day of doing that, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
It's not something I probably appreciate in people who are a bit more introverted or a bit more shy or neurodivergent or anything. The effort that they put in and how it can probably drain your sort of social battery, so to speak. So it's probably, I think everybody needs time to themselves to kind of formulate their thoughts and process everything that's happened. Okay, so how can we sort of help awareness in general and not just in Veramed?
I think we just need to really get people talking about neurodiversity, and things like this podcast is a great step towards doing this. I know it is produced by Veramed, but it is out there for everyone to listen to, isn't it? And I know there will be certain things going out on LinkedIn, certain posts and things by Veramed that will be out there for the wider community to look at as well. So we just need to make sure that people feel comfortable sharing their own experiences. And whether you're someone with a neurodiverse condition yourself, or you have a friend or a relative or a colleague, I think just the more we share these experiences, the more we can help to remove the stigma. And then people will learn what they can do in certain situations to make life easier for people who are neurodivergent. And really that'll help us get the best out of everybody in all situations in life. So I think, just trying to make sure people are more comfortable talking about it in day-to-day life, really. And the more we kind of kick this off, the more I think it will just have a bit of a domino effect, we're hoping. And also just to throw a statistic out there, since we're a stats and programming company, but to say that it's estimated that in the UK, 15% of the population are neurodiverse. And obviously that's no small proportion at all. And to kind of build on Gwen's diagnosis, I think it's not uncommon that people are diagnosed quite late in life. And I know of a couple of people already since just joining this group that have been diagnosed like within the last 6 months with a neurodivergent condition. And so I think we just need to, certainly within the world of work, make sure that we are just treating everybody as individuals. And just because they don't have a diagnosis or they've not shared a diagnosis, that doesn't mean that they don't necessarily need support in a certain way. So I think we just need to be aware of that and make sure that we are as supportive as we possibly can be.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say, because with the sort of awareness of neurodiversity, that people in adult life are getting diagnosed, because unfortunately when they were kids in school, they were probably just labeled as the naughty kid rather than like, oh, they've actually got a condition or anything like this. And even when I was at school, that was definitely the case. And then I know a few friends and a few classmates that didn't get diagnosed until they were 17, 18, or even in their 20s. So what are the sort of future plans for the group?
So we've got quite a lot that's being developed, which is really exciting. So this general training is going to be available for all staff to take. With this training, we're going to be spreading awareness, educating people, giving real life examples of how people can support each other and also recognize the strengths and weaknesses within themselves and how they want to express that with their line managers, developing a line manager and study lead specific training as well, really diving into how you can support your team members, allocating work appropriately in accordance with their strengths and avoiding, where possible, their weaknesses. And we're also creating a Verawiki page, which is basically an internal Wikipedia page where we're going to have a list of like definitions of all these different types of neurodivergent conditions, where to go for more support. We're going to be linking to charities and all that kind of stuff. There's lots planned.
Excellent. Sounds great. So last question. I know we've kind of touched upon this already, but is there any sort of advice you would give to people listening?
So the one thing that I definitely in like recent years, and also the thing that I found most useful to fully internalize, I suppose, it's probably not the right phrasing for it, but it's what I use, is the idea of learning to be selfish or learning to put yourself first when it's needed. This is obviously something that doesn't just apply to neurodiversity, but the idea that you don't always have to be completely selfless or do what the expected norm is. You don't have to go socialize, you don't have to go to that party if you don't want to. Do what's right for you. And I know it might seem obvious to say, it's something I always somewhat knew when I was growing up, but actually realizing to the extent of, you know, how much you should take care of yourself and what is acceptable, I guess, like, you know, what you need to do for yourself is very important, and not feeling pressured to go outside of your comfort zone and completely wear yourself out socially or however, I think is really important. Also, I think Ingrid touched on this already, but for when they were mentioning not everyone having diagnoses, just the idea of potentially just treating people, focusing on the traits and the person of the conditions they have rather than any labels they might have, I think is really helpful, because everyone presents differently and not even all people have a condition to go off of. So just recognizing the traits that are common within neurodiversity as a whole and treating those instead of, you know, pigeonholing, I think is also really important to have a more diverse way of dealing with it. I suppose. Yeah.
No, that's great advice for anyone listening, really. And I completely agree. I think everybody should be a bit more selfish and not feel social pressures or anything like this, because at the end of the day, you need to look after yourself. And once you're better, you'll feel better about life and everything. So yeah, no, thank you. That's great advice.
To add to that as well, we touched on this earlier, kind of offline away from the podcast in our group meeting, but I think everybody needs to get away from the idea that looking after yourself and saying no to things is selfish, because I don't think it is selfish at all. I think it's just self-care, and we'll all be better people because of it. We'll get on with people better and we'll be able to do our work better, and just I think there's just kind of many reasons why that is a good thing to be doing and why we should just not think of it as selfish at all. And I think that will help us to be able to say no and to do things, because we know that actually this is just a great way of looking after ourselves and other people. Mm-hmm. And to not lower our expectations, but not to expect so much perhaps of other people.
Yes, exactly. And not put so much pressure on yourself. That's great advice. Thank you. Right. That's about wraps up for this week's podcast. It was a lot longer episode, but a great episode. So I just want to thank the three of you once again for coming on the podcast and talking so openly and honestly about your own personal experiences. I felt I've genuinely learned a lot from this conversation, and I hope other people listening have as well. So please, if you enjoyed the episode, share the podcast with your colleagues, friends, family, and anyone you think will benefit from listening to this and help spread awareness of neurodiversity. If you like this episode and would like to be notified of any future episodes, please subscribe to us on Spotify, iTunes, or whichever podcast platform you're using. If you'd like to know more about Veramed, please visit our website at veramed.co.uk. You can find us on LinkedIn as well. If you have any questions about Veramed, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to help. You can also find us on Instagram at WeAreVeramed. We have a post going up about neurodiversity as well, with some links to some articles and various websites where you can read up and learn more as well. Thank you all very much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to the three of you. So thanks again for coming on. And until next time, goodbye.